Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Chapter 7, Part 2, page 124. A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "You students," said the fat friar, smiling around at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose?" A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony's about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now, form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into a line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles, which were floating in mid-air over four long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upwards and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whispered, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts history." It was hard to believe that there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open onto the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a four-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stools, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try to get a rabbit out of it. Harry thought wildly that seeing the sort of thing, noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was a complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may think I'm not pretty, but don't judge me on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I'll tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave and heart, the daring never and chivalry set Gryffindor apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. The patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you're a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make real friends, those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in same hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap." The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the four tables and then became quite still again. "So we've just got to try on the hat," Ron whispered to Harry. "I'll kill Fred. He's going to about wrestling a troll." Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. That hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quite witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the One for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be started, she said. About Hannah. A pink-faced girl, white blonde pigtails, stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A few moments paused. Hufflepuff shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bonus Susan! Hufflepuff shouted the hat again, and Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. Boot Terry! Ravenclaw! The second table from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brockleshurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode Millicent then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination. After all, he could hear about Slytherin, but he thought they looked an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during sports lesson at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was not no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think that they liked him. Finch, Fletchley, Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed that the hat shouted out the house at once, but brothers, it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in front of Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry. A horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there, the hat over his eyes for ages, until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said it had been obviously a mistake and he'd better get back on the train. And when Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When he finally shouted Gryffindor, Neville ran off still wearing it, and had to jog back gills of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swagged forward when his name was called, and he got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin! Malfoy went to join his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Nott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, the Perks, Sally Ann, and then, at last, Harry Potter. Harry stepped forward, whispered suddenly, broke out like a hissing fires all over the hall. Potter? Did she say the Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat had dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. The next second, he was looking at the black inside of a hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent. Yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you?